Chapter 2. On to Manassas. I am trying to do my duty, and be sure that I understand it too well ever to make an unnecessary risk of the life which belongs to my family as well as to myself. Charles F. Fisher to his sister, July 17, 1861. On July 3, 1861, the regiment was officially transferred to the service of the Confederate States. This probably meant an early transfer to the seat of war in Virginia. Nevertheless, more personal matters continued to press upon the officers and men. On July 4th, Major Lightfoot was forced to go to Hillsborough to wait upon his sick wife. He did not neglect his duties in spite of family problems. I have myself notified every captain as to what you wish done tomorrow. Have made them take notes of the order so that there may be no misunderstanding. I shall leave the order with Colonel Dortch, who will, I know, see that your wishes are carried out. I have said nothing to anyone about the time of our leaving. The men entrained without incident on July 8th for Raleigh, passing through Hillsborough to the cheers of a large portion of ladies and citizens of the town, and many from the country around, who had assembled at the depot to see them pass. Upon arrival at Raleigh, the men received sad news. Governor Ellis had died. On the 7th instant, at the Red Sulphur Springs, Virginia, Fisher was directed to detail 2 companies of your regiment under Major Lightfoot for the purpose of proceeding to Petersburg to escort the body to this place. The remainder of the regiment was ordered to remain in Raleigh to be held in readiness to form the funeral escort. These were sad beginnings for an illustrious career. Lieutenant Colonel Dortch was ordered to go to Tarboro to accompany Mr. Clark here. The last honors to North Carolina's deceased governor had to be carried out, even though President Davis had been informed that the regiment would be in Richmond 10 days ago. Henry T. Clark, North Carolina's new governor, assured Confederate Secretary of War Leroy P. Walker that the regiment will leave tomorrow and will be subject to your orders and is now formally tendered. At 9:30 a.m. on July 10th, the remains of Governor Ellis, escorted by Company B and C of the 6th Regiment, arrived at the depot of the North Carolina Railroad in Raleigh. The governor's body was removed from the cars and escorted to the Capitol by the military guard, where the state flag was placed over the coffin. The Raleigh Register described the funeral procession. At 10 o'clock, the procession moved from the south gate of the Capitol down Fayetteville Street to the Executive Mansion in the following order. Brigadier General Gwynn, State Troops Commanding, aided by Captain A.D. Moore. First, music. Second, 6th Regiment of Infantry, Colonel Fisher. Third, Ellis Light Artillery, Major Ramsher. Fourth, hearse with the body. Fifth, pallbearers. Sixth, Reverend Clergy. Seventh, Surgeon General and Medical Staff. Eighth, family and relations of deceased. Ninth, Governor of State. 10th, Speaker of the House of Commons. 11th, officers of the executive departments. The procession moved from the Capitol, marched down Fayetteville Street at a quick march, and arrived at the executive mansion. Here, the remains were removed from the hearse, and after appropriate religious services conducted by the Reverend Dr. Mason, were left in the care of an honor guard. On the morning of the 11th, about 8 o'clock, the coffin was escorted from the mansion to the North Carolina Railroad by a military detachment which included part of the 6th Regiment. This procession was accompanied by an excellent band of music, marched with slow, measured steps to the funeral dirge, which was so well discoursed by the band. The coffin was deposited on the train and sent to the Ellis family burying ground near Holtzburg, Davidson County. The delegation from the 6th Regiment accompanied the remains to their final resting place. While these obsequies were in progress, the business places in Raleigh were closed, and private homes were draped in mourning. The public buildings in Raleigh and the statue of Washington on the Capitol Square were also draped. All flags were lowered to half-mast, bells tolled, and half-hour guns fired during the day by a detachment of the Wilmington Light Artillery. Governor Ellis's death caused an important change in Fisher's staff. Lieutenant Colonel Dortch resigned his commission to become Speaker of the North Carolina House of Commons. Warren Winslow, President of the Military Board, filled the regiment vacancy. Major Charles E. Lightfoot of the 6th Regiment State Troops has been promoted to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Captain Robert F. Webb to the rank of Major. First Lieutenant William R. Parrish to the rank of Captain. Second Lieutenant William E. McMahon to the rank of First Lieutenant. The future staff arrangements of the regiment were beginning to shape up. While the regiment was at Raleigh, one of the men voiced an attitude which was prevalent in the ranks. "We had a very good breakfast this morning. Our fare will be better hereafter. A while, anyhow. I want to go and kill old Abe and come back home." Although the regiment was ready for combat, Fisher found he had many purchases to make and numerous accounts to settle. One of these was for the sum of $6 for 3 days' board for 2 horses. This covered the animals of Fisher and Lieutenant Colonel Dortch while the regiment was at Raleigh. Another bill for a small ham, and still another for $71.22 for gray flannel. Fisher forced to pay some of the bounty money for his men out of his own pocket. Captain Alfred A. Mitchell's Company H received $880 in this manner. The colonel even went so far as to advance salaries of many of his officers out of his own pocket, to be refunded from the first payroll of the Confederate government. Some of the officers involved in the amounts they received were Charles E. Lightfoot, Major, paid $220. William H. Alexander, Commissary, $120. Richard W. York, $150. M. W. Page, $75. W. B. Alexander, $50. W. B. Lewis, $75. A. M. Kirkland, $100. The total sum expended by Fisher in this manner amounted to $1,470. The total sum expended by Fisher in paying bills for material and making clothing for the 6th Infantry was $2,128.49. This did not include $410 paid to Miss Sally Poole for caps. It was possibly a good thing, at least for Fisher's pocketbook, that the regiment left Raleigh for Virginia on July 11th. The men moved through Weldon, reaching Petersburg that night. After breakfast, the regiment left for Richmond. Lieutenant Ray described the regiment's stay in Richmond. "We stopped there for a day, awaiting transportation, camping at the old fairground. President Davis reviewed the regiment, making a short speech to us. The troops left Richmond late in the evening of July 12th, traveled by train all night, and passed Manassas Junction, where General Beauregard is encamped and strongly fortified Sunday about 11 o'clock. The men stayed at Manassas Junction until early on the morning of July 14th. They then embarked on the cars and proceeded to Strasburg in the Shenandoah Valley via the Manassas Gap Railroad. Spending the night of the 14th at Strasburg, they were forced marched to Winchester, a distance of 18 miles up the Valley Turnpike. On the morning of July 15th, Lieutenant Willie P. Mangum of Company B described this march. "We all suffered much from fatigue and want of food and the bad weather, but soldiers must become accustomed to privations. It took the regiment 6 hours to reach Winchester. The approach of Union forces to the north in Maryland was expected almost momentarily. Southern forces at Winchester, commanded by General Joseph E. Johnston, were determined to resist the Union advance. Peter W. Hairston of North Carolina wrote, "We have 4,000 militia throwing up breastworks. They are getting tolerably well drilled, and behind those breastworks will fight well." The regiment marched into this situation and was placed in line of battle near the Confederate front line in a wheat field, where the grain had just been cut. The men were tired and hungry from the long march, but were forced to sleep in the wheat stubble, tearing down wheat stalks and spreading our blankets over us. To add to the men's discomfort, a heavy rain fell throughout the night. Early in the morning, Fisher arose to help prepare breakfast for his men. Captain York praised Fisher for this action, saying, "A great deal of our breakfast in the morning of the 17th was cooked by the hands of Charles F. Fisher. It is useless for me to say how our regiment loves him." Many problems presented themselves to Fisher while the regiment was encamped in the vicinity of Winchester. Lists were prepared to show which officers owed money to the colonel, advanced to them for their first pay. The band was paid $300 and sent home to Salisbury. Even the small sums, $2 each, owed by the officers for their commissions had to be properly accounted for. The colonel sent James C. Smith $20 as partial reimbursement for the hire of his valet, Randall. All of these money matters were aggravated by the fact that much money was still owed to merchants in North Carolina who had supplied the equipment to the regiment. These accounts could be neglected for the present when there were other problems facing the regiment, including the dismissal of Dr. Nesbitt, the regimental surgeon. Nesbitt had been dismissed on July 15th, but remained in service, eventually joining a Virginia regiment. Amid all these problems, Fisher held firmly to a serene state of mind. On July 17th, he wrote, "I never fail in an emergency, and I will have all right soon today. I write you freely, the truth always. You comprehend clearly where and how we are, and hereafter. Our trust is in the God of battles, and of mercy, and of justice, who will always do what's best for us. Keep us therefore yourself, peaceful, trustful, and satisfied that I am trying to do my duty, and be sure that I understand it too well ever to make an unnecessary or rash risk of the life which belongs to my family as well as myself. I will write you at the first hour of leisure about many things. Meantime, be hopeful and never anticipate evil tidings. The wonderful good fortune of my life will not desert me now." These words displayed a cheerful attitude, at least an attitude of manly resolution in the midst of an unpleasant situation. When the 6th Regiment reached Winchester, it was brigaded with troops of Brigadier General Bernard E. Bee in Johnston's Army of the Shenandoah. This was the 3rd Brigade, composed of the 7th and 8th Georgia Volunteers and 2 companies, 11th Mississippi Volunteers, as well as the 6th North Carolina. On the evening of July 18th, Johnston drew his army up in line as on dress parade. He read an order to his men which stated that General Beauregard was being attacked by large masses of Union infantry at Manassas. It was necessary to reinforce Beauregard before the Confederate cause was lost. The troops responded to this stirring information with a cheer. The march to aid Beauregard was begun. As the 6th Regiment marched across the Blue Ridge Mountains towards Piedmont Station on the Manassas Gap Railroad, 30 miles away, the men had no idea that they were embarked on a long road to fame and heartache. On that long, hot July night, the destiny of the regiment was unknown. The end of that long road was not in sight.